Hello students, welcome again. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss John Donne's very popular sonnet, Death Be Not Proud. We will discuss this poem stanza-wise, line-wise, and we are also going to discuss the theme and different poetic devices used by John Donne. So now let's begin. See, John Donne is a popular metaphysical poet who was born in 1572 and died in 1631. John Donne was a contemporary of William Shakespeare, of Ben Jonson and John Milton. In the beginning of the 17th century, he has been considered as the father, the founding pillar of one type of poetry known as metaphysical poetry in English literature. He was the man who started writing metaphysical poetry as a reaction against the romantic poetry of the Elizabethan age. John Donne, all through his career, has written about 200 poems, and historians and scholars of English literature have divided all these 200 poems into main two categories, and they are love poems and divine poems. When John Donne was in his young age, he wrote mostly love poems, and towards the later part of his life, John Donne wrote divine or religious poems. But these are some of his most popular poems like The Flea, The Sun Rising, Death Be Not Proud, A Valediction, The Good Morrow, The Canonization. These are some very popular poems which have become immortal in English poetry. But today we want to discuss this poem, Death Be Not Proud. See, this is a sonnet written in 14 lines, and this sonnet expresses a very serious idea that death is not the end of life. In fact, death is the beginning of a new life, life after death. So you can say that this poem is written for those who are afraid of death. The poet says that death is not what it looks like, it is merely a peaceful sleep. Okay, so this is the basic idea. Before we discuss this poem stanza wise, line wise, let me tell you what is the structure of this poem. As I told you, it's a sonnet written in 14 lines, and these 14 lines are mainly divided into two stanzas, an octave and a sestet. Octave means a stanza of 8 lines, and sestet means a stanza of 6 lines. The rhyming scheme of the first stanza is A B B A, A B B A, and the rhyming scheme of the second stanza is C D D C E E. So you can say it's a Petrarchan type of sonnet. You see, Petrarchan sonnet is divided into two stanzas, octave and sestet. And most of the lines of this poem are written in iambic pentameter. That means there are 5 iambs in one line. There are 10 syllables. Okay, so that is the structure of the poem. Now let's try to discuss this poem stanza wise. The first stanza I told you has 8 lines. It is an octave. So I have taken these 4 lines first. So the first stanza of the poem, the first line begins with a poetic device called apostrophe. Apostrophe is a figure of speech in which the poet addresses someone. Here the poet addresses death. The whole poem is a dialogue it's a one-sided dialogue of the poet addressed to death. Okay, the poet writes that be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. Thee means you. The poet says that you should not feel proud of yourself, though some people call you mighty and dreadful. Dreadful means fearful. In fact, that is neither of these things, because people don't really die when death comes to them. So this is the idea in the first 4 lines, where the poet tells death not to be proud. In the next four lines, the poet says, from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be. This rest and sleep are just your pictures. Okay, so here the poet compares death with sleep and death with rest. Okay, and sleep and rest give pleasure to us, yes or no? You see, when we are tired of so much work, we go to take rest, we sleep, and then after the sleep, after the rest, we feel regenerated, we feel pleasure. In the same manner, death gives pleasure to the people. Okay, so that is what he says. The poet compares death to rest and sleep in the next four lines. According to John Donne, death, like sleep, is nothing more than resting of the body. Soul becomes free at the end of life. Now look at these next four lines here. The poet compares death to a slave. Thou art slave to fate. Thou means you. You are a slave to fate and chance, to kings and desperate men. Okay, and death is associated with poison, associated with war and illness. This war, illness, and poison, they are meanest elements on this earth. So death is not such a mighty thing. Okay, even drugs or means medicine, poppy and charms. Poppy and charms means medicines and magic also gives you sleep and rest. So death has actually no role to play. It has no power. And better than thy stock, why swellest thou then? So the poet wants to assert that there is nothing which should make you feel proud. In the last two lines, the last couplet, the poet writes that one short sleep past, we wake eternally. This death is what? It is a short sleep. When it passes, we wake up eternally. So there is an eternal life after a short sleep called death, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. The poet tells death that death, you will die. We are eternal human beings. Soul does not die. So this poem is all in all about the eternal soul. This poem is about life after death. Okay, what are the poetic devices used by John Donne? Then you can say different devices like metaphor, apostrophe, personification, alliteration. All these different devices have been used by John Donne. Number one is personification. What is a personification? A personification is a figure of speech in which human qualities are given to non-human things. Here, John Donne has personified death all throughout the poem. Okay, and he tells death not to be proud. But being proud is actually a human quality, and death is not human, but this human quality is given to death. That means it is a use of personification. In the same manner, another important figure of speech is metaphor. There are three metaphors in this poem. The first is used in the opening line, death be not proud. Here, death is compared to a proud man. In the second time, in line number 9, you find this line, thou art slave to fate. Here, death is compared to a slave, so that is also another metaphor. And in the last line also, there is an extended metaphor where death is compared to a non-existent and unrealistic object. So three times death has been compared to three different objects. So that is a use of metaphor. In the same manner, there is also alliteration. Alliteration is what? It is a repetition of the same consonant in one single line. The consonants like ka, pa, ma, when these consonants are repeated more than twice in a single line, it is called an alliteration. You read this line, and better than thy stock, why swellest thou then? Here the sound the has been repeated 4 times. In the same manner, if you read another line, the sound ma, is repeated, much pleasure than from thee much more must flow. So the same consonant ma is repeated 4 times. So that is an alliteration. In the last line of the poem, there is an irony. Irony means a statement which means something very much opposite. You see the last line, death thou shalt die. Now this is a paradoxical statement. Death will die. Death actually does not die, but the poet wants to say that death of a human being is actually the death of death. Human beings don't die, body dies, but soul is eternal. So all in all, different figures of speech have been used by John Donne. So all in all, let me conclude by saying that this sonnet, Death Be Not Proud, is a very serious poem which presents a high philosophical idea about the eternity of soul. Soul does not die, and the same concept has been expressed in Srimad Bhagavad Gita also. Vasansi Jenani Yatha Vihaya. Lord Krishna says these things, that we change our clothes. When we change our body, it is just like changing clothes. Okay, death of a person does not mean the death. It is the beginning of a new life. It's a, Indian philosophy believes in the philosophy of reincarnation. So there is life after death. Death is not permanent end of life. Death is just a short sleep which makes the soul free from this material world. So this is the basic idea presented by John Donne in such a beautiful and simple manner. I hope this presentation is helpful to you from your examination point of view. Thank you for watching. Thank you.